On a forgotten planet far from the busy trade routes of the galaxy, the once great Vectrian civilization now lay in ruin. The city streets, which had once echoed with the laughter of families and the hum of bustling markets, were eerily silent. Towering buildings, now crumbling, stood as lonely reminders of a civilization that had been powerful and respected. The Vectrians had been a proud people, advanced in technology, culture, and knowledge. But now, they were nothing more than a species abandoned by the rest of the universe. The planet, once home to a thriving population, was now decimated by disease and a long history of betrayal. The Vectrians had once been allies with many galactic factions, but something had changed. The galaxy had turned its back on them, offering no help as their numbers dwindled. The Vectrians were left to fend for themselves, trapped in their own world of isolation. It was during a routine mission that the human scout ship, Odyssey, first stumbled upon the planet. The crew had no idea they would be the first outsiders to set foot on the planet in decades. The ship had been sent to explore an uncharted area. But when they passed by this forgotten world, they couldn't ignore the distress signals coming from below. The signals were weak, but they were enough to raise suspicion. Captain Adrian Hayes, a seasoned officer, ordered the ship to investigate. "Prepare for landing," he said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded with anticipation. What they would find on the surface could change everything. As the Odyssey descended into the planet's atmosphere, the crew gazed out the windows, seeing a landscape filled with broken cities and overgrown streets. The remains of ancient technology lay scattered, untouched for years. There were no signs of life, or so they thought. When the crew made their way to the planet's surface, they were greeted by a sight that shook them to the core. The Vectrians, thin, frail, and covered in strange markings, they shuffled slowly through the ruins, their eyes hollow and their movements sluggish. Their once vibrant skin had turned a pale gray, and their once beautiful cities were nothing more than ghostly remnants. Despite the Vectrians' condition, they still held on to their dignity. When the humans approached, they froze, wary of outsiders. But there was no hostility, only deep sadness in their eyes. They had learned long ago not to trust anyone, not even their own kind. The humans' presence was a surprise they weren't ready for. Dr. Ilara, a compassionate scientist aboard the Odyssey, stepped forward. She had studied alien species for years, and she knew that this was no ordinary encounter. She could see the fear in their eyes, the fear of being hurt again, of being forgotten once more. The Vectrians had been abandoned, not only by their former allies but by the entire galaxy. "I know you must feel like no one cares," Dr. Ilara said softly, her voice filled with empathy. "But we are here to help. You are not alone anymore." The Vectrians, though still hesitant, watched her closely. They had no reason to trust the humans, but they had no other choice. Their world was dying, and maybe, just maybe, the humans were their last hope. As Dr. Ilara knelt down to examine one of the sick Vectrians, Captain Hayes looked around, realizing that this was more than just a mission. This was an opportunity to help a species that had been forgotten by the stars themselves. It was a chance to make a difference, to show that humanity cared when no one else did. And so the decision was made. The humans would help the Vectrians, but the road ahead would be difficult, and there was much they still didn't understand about the Vectrians' past and the galaxy that had cast them aside. The humans were about to learn that this forgotten species held secrets that could change the course of the galaxy forever. As the humans settled into their temporary base on the surface of the Vectrian planet, they began to realize just how dire the situation was. The Vectrians, though still alive, were not thriving. Their once proud civilization had crumbled, and the disease that ravaged their population was not just physical, it was cultural and emotional as well. It had been decades since the galaxy had turned its back on them, and the Vectrians had grown weary, distrustful of anyone who might offer help. Dr. Ilara, a leading scientist and compassionate heart of the human crew, spent most of her time interacting with the Vectrians, trying to understand the sickness that had taken so much from them. She had seen alien diseases before, but this one was unlike anything she had encountered. It wasn't just a biological weapon. The disease was a combination of something deeply unnatural and something cultural, a virus engineered to break both the body and the spirit. In the planet's largest city, the humans set up a makeshift medical facility, but the Vectrians were hesitant to enter. They had been abandoned for so long, forced to rely on their own meager resources, that they no longer trusted outsiders. The humans, especially Dr. Ilara, could see the deep scars in their eyes, the pain of being forgotten. After several attempts to offer assistance, Dr. Ilara sat down with Maris, a Vectrian leader who had been quietly observing the humans from a distance. Maris had once been part of a powerful council that governed the Vectrian people, but now she was one of the last remaining members of a dying leadership. "I know you want to help," Maris said quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the makeshift medical equipment. "But we have been abandoned by the stars. What could you possibly do that the galaxy has not already failed to do?" Dr. Ilara looked at Maris with sympathy. "I understand that you are afraid to trust us," she replied. "But we are not like the others who left you behind. We want to help you survive." Maris shook her head. "You are all the same. You come to us when we are weak, hoping to fix what is broken, but you cannot heal what has been shattered." For a moment, Dr. Ilara felt a wave of doubt. Could they truly help these people? Would they ever be able to gain the Vectrians' trust? But then, she thought of humanity's own history, the countless times they had been knocked down and had to fight back. This was no different. They couldn't give up. As the days passed, the humans worked tirelessly to create a cure. Dr. Ilara's team worked around the clock, testing samples from the Vectrians and cross-referencing them with human data. But progress was slow, and the Vectrians continued to decline. One evening, as Dr. Ilara sat alone in her lab, she received an unexpected visit from Maris. The leader of the Vectrians stood in the doorway, her eyes filled with a mixture of caution and hope. "You are still working on the cure?" Maris asked, her voice softer now, as though her walls were beginning to crumble. Dr. Ilara nodded. "We're making progress. It's not easy, but we will not stop until we find a way." Maris stared at her for a long moment, then finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope you're right. If we can't be saved, then what is left for us?" The words hung heavy in the air. The Vectrians were on the brink, and the humans knew that time was running out. But in that moment, Dr. Ilara made a vow to herself and to the Vectrians. No matter how long it took, they would fight for their survival together. The struggle was just beginning, and the journey ahead would test their resolve. But for the first time, the Vectrians saw a flicker of hope, and it came from the humans who refused to leave them behind. As the days passed, the humans and Vectrians worked side by side, each struggling with their own fears and doubts. While Dr. Ilara's team continued to work tirelessly on the cure for the disease, something much deeper was unfolding, a secret buried beneath the surface of the Vectrians' history that could change everything. Captain Adrian Hayes, the leader of the human crew, had been overseeing the planet's security, making sure that nothing threatened the fragile alliance between the humans and the Vectrians. He often found himself wandering through the abandoned Vectrian cities, drawn to the strange beauty of the ruins. The tall, broken structures seemed to whisper the secrets of a past long gone. As he explored, he stumbled upon an old Vectrian archive, hidden beneath the remains of a grand library. The building had been partially destroyed, but there was something untouched in the depths, a vault of ancient documents. Curious, Hayes used his equipment to carefully open the vault. Inside, he found a wealth of records, maps, and images, things that could reveal more about the Vectrians' past than anyone had imagined. He brought the findings back to the ship, showing Dr. Ilara and the others. They all gathered around the old documents, their minds racing with questions. As Dr. Ilara sifted through the materials, one document caught her attention. It was an ancient map showing a galactic alliance of powerful species that once included the Vectrians. but the map had been torn at the edges, as though someone had deliberately tried to erase part of the history. Intrigued, she carefully pieced it together. It seems the Vecrians were part of a much larger federation, she said, her voice filled with disbelief. But something happened. The map shows that they were cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Maris, who had been standing nearby, overheard the conversation. She stepped forward, her face pale. "You're right," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We were once allies with many of the galaxy's greatest powers, but a betrayal came from within. The Jetar. They were our greatest allies and our greatest enemies." The humans were stunned. The Jetar, an ancient and powerful race, had been known for their cunning and ruthlessness. Maris's words explained everything. Why the Vecrians had been abandoned, why their cities were now in ruins, and why they had been left to suffer alone. "The Jetar betrayed us," Maris continued, her eyes filled with pain. "They sabotaged our ships, poisoned our crops, and spread rumors to turn our allies against us. We had no choice but to defend ourselves, and in the process, we lost everything." Dr. Ilara's heart sank. The Jetar had not only attacked the Vecrians physically, but they had also destroyed their reputation, leaving them isolated from the rest of the galaxy. The disease that ravaged the Vecrians was no accident. It was part of a larger plan to wipe them out. Captain Hayes clenched his fists. He had been ready to help the Vecrians, but now he realized there was a much bigger battle ahead. The Jetar were a force to be reckoned with, and they had to be stopped before they could do any more damage. "We can't let them get away with this," Hayes said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll not only save the Vecrians, but we'll expose the truth about what the Jetar did. The galaxy deserves to know." Maris looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in years. "You're willing to fight for us?" she asked softly. "Yes," Hayes replied. "We'll fight together. This isn't just about saving your people. It's about stopping the Jetar from hurting anyone else." The humans and the Vecrians were now united by a common enemy. But as they prepared for what lay ahead, they knew that the road would be dangerous. The truth had been uncovered, but the fight for survival was far from over. The battle with the Jetar had only just begun. Time was running out for the Vecrians. The disease that had ravaged their population continued to spread, and their fragile hope for survival was beginning to fade. Despite Dr. Ilara's relentless efforts to find a cure, the virus was more complicated than they had anticipated. It adapted quickly to any treatment they tried, making it harder and harder to stop. Dr. Ilara spent countless hours in the lab, poring over research and test samples. She worked alongside Maris, who insisted on helping despite her own deteriorating health. The Vecrian leader had become more and more frail, but her determination to see her people survive kept her going. She refused to let the humans fight this battle alone. Captain Hayes often checked in on Dr. Ilara and her team, knowing how crucial their work was. He could see the stress on her face as the days dragged on. But he also saw something else, something that gave him hope. The Vecrians, despite their years of isolation, had begun to trust the humans. They were no longer just outsiders. They were allies. One evening, Captain Hayes walked through the medical facility to find Dr. Ilara and Maris working together. The two women were deep in conversation, their voices hushed as they examined the latest test results. "We're close," Dr. Ilara said, exhaustion evident in her voice. "I think we finally isolated the key strain of the virus. We just need to tweak the serum and test it one more time." Maris nodded, her expression serious. "I can feel the change. It's slow, but there is a change. We've waited so long for this." But as the humans celebrated their progress, they couldn't ignore the underlying danger. The Jetar were aware of what was happening on Vecria. They had spies everywhere, and their silence meant only one thing. They were planning something. Captain Hayes knew that they wouldn't let the Vecrians rise again without a fight. If the humans were going to save the Vecrians, they would need to be prepared for a battle unlike any they had faced before. Late one night, As the crew gathered for a meeting, Captain Hayes looked out at the stars, his mind focused on the coming war. We've made progress, but we can't afford to be complacent. The Zetar will stop at nothing to make sure the Vectrians don't survive. We need to be ready. The crew nodded in agreement, knowing that their mission had just become much more dangerous. They had come to Vectria to offer help, but now they were embroiled in a fight for the future of the entire galaxy. The Vectrians, once forgotten and cast aside, were no longer alone. Humanity had stood by them, and now they would stand together against a powerful enemy. Dr. Ilara and Maris continued their work, pushing forward despite the odds. The cure was nearly within their grasp, but the real battle was just beginning. The Zetar would come, and when they did, the humans and Vectrians would need to stand united if they hoped to survive. As the humans prepared for the coming war, they realized that this wasn't just about saving one species, it was about proving that no one should be abandoned, no one should be forgotten, and humanity, despite its flaws, was willing to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. As the humans and Vectrians worked together to prepare for the coming war, a shadow loomed over them. Though the cure for the plague was nearly ready, the humans knew the hardest part was yet to come. The Zetar would not simply stand by and allow their betrayal to be exposed. They would fight to the very end to preserve their secrets, and the Vectrians' survival threatened to reveal everything. Captain Hayes had known the Zetar were dangerous, but as he continued to learn more about their reach and influence, he realized just how far their power extended. The Zetar were not just a threat to the Vectrians, they had their hands in almost every corner of the galaxy. Their network of spies and agents stretched far beyond the boundaries of Vectria, and their corruption ran deep. One evening, as Captain Hayes and Dr. Ilara pored over intelligence reports, they stumbled upon something shocking. A hidden message embedded in the Zetar's encrypted communications. It was a plan to destroy the cure and wipe out the Vectrians once and for all. Dr. Ilara read the message aloud, her voice trembling with disbelief. They knew we were close to finding a cure. They've been monitoring us this entire time. They're planning to attack our base in the next few days. Hayes clenched his fists. They'll try to stop us. We need to prepare. We can't let them take everything we've worked for. The humans quickly shared the news with the Vectrians, who were equally stunned by the betrayal. Maris, her face pale with shock, struggled to understand how the Zetar could have been behind their fall for so many years. The Zetar had been their allies once. How could they have been so treacherous? They didn't just attack us physically, Maris said, her voice thick with emotion. They poisoned our reputation. They turned everyone against us. We were isolated, and we didn't even know why. Now, I see it. Everything they did was part of a bigger plan. The humans and Vectrians gathered together to discuss their next move. The Zetar's plan was clear. They'd wanted to destroy the Vectrians once and for all. If they succeeded, not only would the Vectrians be wiped out, but the galaxy would remain blind to the truth of what had really happened. The Zetar would continue to pull the strings from the shadows, untouched by the consequences of their actions. We need to strike first, Captain Hayes said, his voice filled with determination. We have the cure now. We have the evidence. We can't wait for them to make the first move. Dr. Ilara nodded. We'll finish the serum and distribute it among the Vectrians, but we also need to expose the Zetar's crimes to the rest of the galaxy. They need to know what they've done. The humans and Vectrians began to formulate a plan. They would launch a series of covert operations to gather more evidence and sabotage the Zetar's ability to launch an attack. But they also knew that a larger battle loomed on the horizon. The Zetar would not go down without a fight. As the night fell over Vectria, the humans and Vectrians shared a quiet moment of resolve. They had uncovered the truth, but the war had only just begun. The fight for survival was no longer just about saving the Vectrians. It was about stopping the Zetar from destroying anyone else, and they would stop them, no matter the cost. The galaxy had been blind for too long. It was time for the truth to come to light, and humanity, standing alongside the Vecrians, would make sure of it. As the days passed on the Vecrian planet, the stakes grew higher. The humans knew that the Jetar wouldn't wait long before launching their attack. Every moment they delayed gave the Jetar more time to prepare. The cure for the disease that had plagued the Vecrians was almost ready, but now, the fight for survival was bigger than just a cure. The Jetar had to be stopped before they could carry out their deadly plans. Captain Hayes gathered his crew and the Vecrian leaders in the command center. The walls were lined with maps of the galaxy, showing the locations of key Jetar strongholds. The humans had learned enough about the Jetar's movements to know that their attack would come soon, and it would be swift. If they didn't act now, the Vecrians would be wiped out. "We can't afford to sit back and wait for them to strike first," Captain Hayes said, his voice firm. "We need to take the fight to them. The Jetar won't hesitate to destroy us if they think we're vulnerable." Dr. Ilara stood beside him, her face pale but resolute. "We've made progress on the cure, but it's not just about saving lives anymore. It's about showing the galaxy that the Vecrians will not be silenced. We'll fight to the end, and we'll expose the Jetar for the monsters they are." Maris, the Vecrian leader, spoke up. Her voice had regained some strength since the humans had arrived, and her resolve was clear. "We've been abandoned for too long. Now we have allies, humans who care when no one else does. We fight together. The Jetar think they can control us, but they have no idea what we are capable of." The humans and Vecrians began to make plans, combining their strengths. The humans brought their advanced technology, while the Vecrians contributed their knowledge of their home planet's terrain and hidden systems. Together, they began to form a strategy to fight back. "First, we need to secure the cure," Dr. Ilara said. "We can't let the Jetar destroy it before we distribute it. We'll need to set up defenses around our medical facilities." "Agreed," Hayes replied. "Then, we'll need to send out a small team to strike at their communication systems. If we can disrupt their command, we can slow down their attack." Maris nodded. "We know the Jetar have a base on the southern continent. It's heavily guarded, but if we strike quickly and with precision, we can take them by surprise." The plan was set. The humans and Vecrians were no longer just surviving. They were fighting back, and they were doing it together. That night, as the crew prepared for their mission, Dr. Ilara and Maris stood on a high balcony overlooking the planet. The Vecrian city below was silent, the lights flickering as the two women watched over the people they were fighting for. "We've lost so much," Maris said quietly, her gaze distant. "But we don't have to lose everything." Dr. Ilara smiled, placing a hand on Maris's shoulder. "We won't. Not while we have each other." The following day, the humans and Vecrians launched their first strike. It was fast and fierce, a coordinated attack on the Jetar's communication network. With the help of the Vecrians' knowledge of the land, they were able to move through the dense forests and hidden paths without being detected. The mission was a success, but they knew the Jetar wouldn't give up easily. As the crew returned to base, Captain Hayes looked at the team with pride. "This is just the beginning. The Jetar won't stop until we stop them. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." The humans and Vecrians were united in their resolve. They had uncovered the truth. They had begun the fight, and they would not rest until they had won. The galaxy would see that no one, not even the Jetar, could break their spirit. Together, they would prove that humanity's resolve could overcome any obstacle. The battle against the Jetar had only just begun, but the humans and Vecrians knew that to truly defeat their enemies, they had to go beyond the front lines. The Jetar had spread their influence far and wide, weaving a web of lies and deceit that had kept their actions hidden for years. The key to stopping them wasn't just defeating them in battle, it was exposing the truth to the entire galaxy. Captain Hayes knew that the Galactic Council, the central governing body of the galaxy, held the power to rally other species against the Jetar. But getting the Council to believe them was going to be difficult. The Jatar had too much influence. Many council members had been swayed by their lies in the past, and even now they were reluctant to believe the Vecrean side of the story. "I'm not sure they'll listen," Captain Hayes said, pacing in the command center. "The Jatar have had their grip on the council for so long. They'll do everything they can to shut us down." Dr. Ilara looked up from her console, her face lined with determination. "But we have the evidence. We have the cure. If we can prove that the Jatar were behind the plague, we'll have a chance to make them see the truth." Maris, standing beside them, clenched her fists. Her eyes were filled with both anger and hope. "The Council needs to know. The galaxy needs to know what the Jatar did to us. If they remain in power, no one is safe. They'll do the same to anyone who stands in their way." With the evidence in hand, the humans and Vecreans set out for the Galactic Council, hoping to make their case. The journey was long, and the tension between the two species was palpable. Both sides were nervous. This could be their only chance to expose the Jatar's treachery. When they finally arrived at the Council's massive space station, they were met with a mixed reception. Some members were willing to listen, while others were skeptical, unwilling to believe that the Jatar could be capable of such betrayal. The humans presented their findings, carefully laying out the evidence. Dr. Ilara spoke passionately about the disease and its origins, explaining how the Jatar had sabotaged the Vecrean civilization. Maris shared her people's history, detailing the betrayal they had suffered at the hands of their former allies. "The Jatar are not just criminals," Maris said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "They are a threat to all of us. They tried to erase my people, and they will do the same to anyone who gets in their way." At first, there was silence. The council members exchanged glances, some appearing doubtful, others skeptical. The Jatar had always been powerful, and their influence was hard to ignore. Then, a voice broke the silence. It was from one of the council members, a representative from a distant planet. "We've heard rumors of the Jatar's actions, but nothing concrete. What proof do you have that this isn't some desperate attempt to regain your lost status?" The room grew tense. Maris's eyes narrowed, but she did not back down. "We have the proof. We have your silence, your refusal to act, to thank for this. You allowed them to destroy us. You chose to turn your back on us." Dr. Ilara stepped forward, holding up the data they had collected. "This is not just a story. It's a fact. The Jatar are behind the plague. They poisoned our people, and they'll do the same to any planet that gets in their way." The council listened in silence as the evidence unfolded before them. It was clear that the Jatar's betrayal was not just an attack on the Vecreans. It was a threat to the entire galaxy. Finally, a ripple of change seemed to move through the room. Some of the council members began to speak up, condemning the Jatar's actions. Others, still hesitant, agreed that an investigation should be launched. Captain Hayes exhaled in relief. They had made progress, but the battle was far from over. The Jatar would fight back, and they would do whatever they could to stop the truth from being exposed. But for the first time in years, Maris allowed herself a moment of hope. The galaxy had heard their story. The Jatar's reign of deception was beginning to crack. Now it was time to finish what they had started. The humans and Vecreans were no longer just survivors. They were becoming a force for change. And together, they would see the Jatar brought to justice. The meeting with the Galactic Council had been a small victory, but everyone knew the hardest fight was yet to come. The Jatar were not going to give up without a fight. They had already shown their willingness to do anything to maintain control, and now they knew that the humans and Vecreans were a threat. With the evidence they had gathered, the truth about the Jatar's betrayal was beginning to spread, but the fight was far from over. Captain Hayes stood on the deck of the Odyssey, staring out into the vastness of space. The stars shimmered like distant promises, but the dark shadow of the Jatar loomed over them. The human and Vecrean alliance was stronger than ever, but they were still facing an enemy far more powerful and cunning than they could have imagined. "We're not just fighting for the Vecreans anymore," Captain Hayes said, turning to Dr. Ilara. We're fighting for everyone. The Jetar's corruption goes deeper than we thought. If we don't stop them, they'll continue to destroy lives across the galaxy." Dr. Ilara nodded, her expression determined. "The cure is ready. We've shared it with the Vecrians, and we'll distribute it to others once we've secured the planet. But we need to make sure the Jetar can't stop us." The plan was simple. Take the fight to the Jetar before they could launch a full-scale attack. The humans and Vecrians knew the Jetar had a base on the southern continent of Vecria. It was heavily guarded, but if they acted quickly, they could cripple the Jetar's ability to coordinate their forces. "We need to hit them hard," Hayes said to Maris, who stood by his side. "We can't let them regroup. The sooner we strike, the better." Maris's eyes were filled with a fierce resolve. "The Jetar thought they had destroyed us, but we are not as weak as they believe. We will fight with everything we have." The attack was launched at dawn. The humans, working with the Vecrians, infiltrated the Jetar's base using the same covert tactics that had allowed them to sabotage the Jetar's communications before. But this time, there was no turning back. They were going in to destroy the heart of the Jetar's operations. The journey to the Jetar base was treacherous, with the team navigating through dense jungles and rocky terrain. They were met with resistance, but the humans and Vecrians fought back fiercely. Every step forward was hard-won, but they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that they were fighting for their future. As they reached the Jetar base, the full scale of the battle became clear. The Jetar had mobilized their forces, and the battle raged on for hours. The humans and Vecrians, though outnumbered, fought with a strength and determination that the Jetar had not expected. The humans' advanced technology, combined with the Vecrians' knowledge of their planet's terrain, gave them an edge. In the thick of the battle, Dr. Ilara and Maris fought side by side. Despite the chaos around them, they moved with purpose, cutting through enemy lines to reach the control center of the Jetar base. "We're almost there," Maris said, breathing heavily as she ducked behind a rock for cover. Dr. Ilara nodded, sweat beading on her forehead. "We can't let them escape. If we take out their command center, we can cripple their forces." With one final push, the humans and Vecrians reached the heart of the base. They planted explosives and triggered the destruction of the Jetar's central command. The shockwave from the explosion sent ripples through the base, signaling their victory. But as the dust settled and the sounds of battle faded, they knew this was just the beginning. The Jetar had been dealt a significant blow, but they were not defeated yet. They would fight until the very end, and the humans and Vecrians would be ready. As Captain Hayes looked over the battlefield, he realized the true cost of this war. Lives had been lost, but the fight had brought them closer together. The humans and Vecrians had forged a bond stronger than any weapon, and that bond would be their greatest strength in the battles to come. The Jetar may have thought they had won, but the humans and Vecrians were proving them wrong. Together, they would fight for their freedom, and nothing would stop them. The battle was over, but the work was far from finished. The Jetar had been dealt a serious blow, but their grip on the galaxy was still strong. The humans and Vecrians had won a major victory, but they knew the fight for the future was just beginning. The destruction of the Jetar's base had crippled their forces on Vecria, but it wasn't enough to stop them completely. The humans and Vecrians had become an unexpected alliance. A species once on the brink of extinction, the Vecrians had found new hope in the humans. In turn, the humans had found something extraordinary in the Vecrians, an ancient species with a rich history and untapped potential. Together, they had proven that no one, no matter how powerful, could erase them from the galaxy. Back on Vecria, the healing process had begun. The cure for the disease that had ravaged the Vecrian population was now in full effect. The Vecrians, though still weak, were starting to regain their strength. Many of them were already showing signs of recovery, but it would take time for them to fully heal, both physically and emotionally. The scars of betrayal ran deep. Dr. Ilara, who had worked tirelessly on the cure, now found herself standing alongside Maris in one of the newly rebuilt Vecrean cities. The ruins of the old cities were still there, but new life was beginning to bloom. The Vecreans had always been an advanced species, and now, with the humans' help, they were rebuilding with new technologies and ideas. It wasn't just a physical reconstruction. It was a rebirth. "We have a long way to go," Maris said, her voice full of hope and determination, as she watched her people start to rebuild their homes. "But we are no longer alone. We have allies who care, and together, we will rise again." Dr. Ilara smiled, watching as groups of Vecreans worked together, planting crops and working on new infrastructure. There was a new energy in the air, a sense of purpose that had been lost for far too long. She had seen the Vecreans at their lowest, but now she saw a species that was determined to thrive again. It was more than survival. It was about rediscovering who they were and what they could accomplish. But while the Vecreans were rebuilding, the humans knew that the galaxy still held many dangers. The Jetar were not easily defeated, and there were other threats out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. The humans had become a powerful force in the galaxy, but they were far from the only ones with power. The stakes were higher than ever. "We can't let our guard down," Captain Hayes said, speaking to the crew aboard the Odyssey. "The Jetar are still out there, and there are others who will try to take advantage of our victory. We need to stay vigilant, work together, and make sure that no one else is left behind." The crew nodded in agreement. They had done the impossible, but they knew that the real work was just beginning. The galaxy had been forever changed by the humans' involvement, and they were determined to make sure it stayed that way. For the Vecreans, this was a new chapter. They were no longer the outcasts of the galaxy. They were no longer alone, and as they rebuilt their cities and their lives, they knew they had a future, one filled with hope, unity, and the strength of their new allies. The war was over, but the true battle was only beginning. Together, humanity and the Vecreans had started a new era, one where no one would be left to suffer in silence, and no species would ever be abandoned again. And in that new era, they would fight, not just for survival, but for a future where unity and compassion would define the galaxy. The stars above Vecrea twinkled with the promise of a new beginning. The humans and Vecreans stood together, looking out over the planet they had fought so hard to save. The Jetar were no longer the looming threat they once were. Their control over the galaxy had been shattered, and with each passing day, the alliance between the humans and the Vecreans grew stronger. Captain Hayes stood on the balcony of the Odyssey, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Vecrea's once dying cities were now bustling with life again, as the Vecreans worked tirelessly to rebuild. The human crew had stayed, helping with the reconstruction, sharing their knowledge, and learning from the Vecreans in return. There was an unspoken bond between the two species, one forged through struggle and mutual respect. "The work here is far from over," Hayes said, his voice thoughtful. "But we've made it. We've shown that the galaxy can change." Dr. Ilara joined him, her face filled with quiet pride. "We've come so far. The Vecreans have their health back, their homes are being rebuilt, and they're no longer alone. But we can't forget the rest of the galaxy." It was true. While the victory on Vecrea was significant, it was just one part of a much larger battle. The Jetar's defeat had rippled across the galaxy, leaving cracks in the power structure they had once controlled. But there were still others who might try to fill that void, and many species still felt the weight of years of betrayal, isolation, and neglect. "We've shown them that unity works," Dr. Ilara continued. "And if we can build something here, we can build something for the rest of the galaxy. We've proven that even the greatest odds can be overcome if we stand together." The humans and Vecreans knew that the fight for peace was not over. The galaxy was vast, and the challenges ahead were many. But there was hope now, something that had been missing for so long. For the first time in ages, the Vecreans saw themselves not as outcasts, but as a part of something much bigger. And for humanity, they had found new allies, new friends, species that shared in their values of cooperation, strength, and resilience. "We have a lot to do," Maris said as she walked up to join the others. Her people were rebuilding, but she was thinking ahead. There are still species out there who need to know that they're not forgotten. We've been given a second chance. It's our turn to help others. Captain Hayes smiled. "You're right, but we'll do it together. Humanity and the Vecrians will lead the way. We've set an example, and now it's time for the rest of the galaxy to follow." The Vecrians and humans worked side by side, rebuilding not just cities, but entire systems. They shared technology, knowledge, and resources. As the planet healed, so did their bond. They worked together to establish new alliances with other planets, reaching out to those who had been ignored for too long, offering them a hand of friendship. The Odyssey prepared to leave, but this time, it wasn't just a mission. It was a journey towards something bigger. The humans and Vecrians had proven that no matter how dark the galaxy seemed, light could still break through. They had fought, they had won, and now they would lead the charge toward a future united. As the Odyssey lifted off, Captain Hayes looked out at the planet below, his heart full of pride. This is just the beginning. The galaxy is waiting for us. And with that, humanity and the Vecrians set their sights on the stars, determined to build a future where no one would be left behind, and where unity, compassion, and hope would guide the way. Together, they would show the galaxy that a united future was not just a dream, it was a reality.